welcome back to the show. Community Voices Heard Power is a not-for-profit organization educating and advocating for Black and Brown communities about issues that affect them negatively. The next guest creates as well as builds strategies to center the voice of Black women in necessary policy change within New York State. Joining us now to share is the Executive Director of Community Voices Heard. It is sister organization Community Voices Heard Power, Juanita O. Lewis. And Juanita, thank you for being with us again, and glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Daren. I'm excited to be back here.
Yeah. And when we talk about Black voices being heard, particularly that of women, I know that's an emphasis of yours, but talk to us about how you arrived at this necessity to say that when it comes to women and Black voices, it has to be heard.
Yeah. So, this survey came about 2-3 years ago through our sister organization, Community Voices Heard Power. The whole idea was to start looking at Black women seen as policy makers and changers and originators, as opposed to just, those that go to the ballot box and shift elections, right? Because we just keep seeing statistics always showing that Black women usually make a difference in critical elections. And we always get thanked by those who win for Black women voting. But when we see policies being created, they don't reflect the things that are impacting Black women, right? You don't see anything about Black maternal health. You're not hearing the housing conversation really centering around that Black women are the most vulnerable for eviction. And so when this survey came about, it was like, this is an opportunity to actually get our voices out there and to show that we as Black women, we're not a monolith. We come with different experiences, different backgrounds, different interests that are critical to having real equitable decision-making policies and opportunities.
Yeah. So acquaint our viewers a little bit more with the survey, because out of the survey came some real tangible things that need to be looked at and worked on. But talk about the background of the survey and what was going on there.
Yeah. So, the idea to do the survey, like I said, came from all of the things around Black women's voices being left out of the policy decision-making process. And so came up with the idea to survey 5,000 women across New York State, Black women, and asking, what are issues that are important to you? How do you engage in politics? How do you think about politics? What are barriers? Things of that nature. And so, we were knocking on doors, we had Facebook ads, we had text campaigns that were, asking those questions from our survey. And so we were able to get the results back from our first phase of the project. And, the results were interesting, right? We were able to see that some of the top issues that were impacting Black women were housing, being able to have livable wages, healthcare, and education. And that 18 to 35-year-olds from the demographic that we spoke to, right, the 18 to 35-year-olds, they talked about being the least engaged, or the data showed that they were the least engaged in the political process, because there was a big gap around voter education and voter engagement. Again, statistics show, at least in New York State, that Black women are the highest of being registered, but the least engaged. And so it was an eye-opening moment for us, because then that allowed us to start thinking about how we do our voter education process, right? How are we talking about these issues and how we're talking to this particular demographic? Because we had women from the age of 18 all the way at least, I think, to 80 something fill out the survey. But it was that demographic of the 18 to 35-year-olds that really stood out to us because of the barrier around civic engagement. And then overall, right, I think that was just something that came up as well. There are just different degrees of engagement for women, and they've named what's in the barrier. One was just understanding the process. Mm-hmm. And then another thing that was listed out was being able to attend particular meetings, because a lot of city council meetings and things of that nature are held during the day. If you're a working woman, you're not able to make those meetings. So you're automatically left out of that process. And so that will allow us to go back to some of these council members and elected officials and say, your meetings aren't accessible for a large percentage of people, what does that look like? What needs to shift?
Well, talk to me about this because we talk about the issue of childcare, right? We know that that's pretty interesting, and we know that that's a staple. You talk about gender pay. We've been
Yeah.
talking about that for years. But
Mhm.
when you took this survey, what was it that really stuck out most to you that was surprising that maybe you didn't know?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I would say the thing that stuck out the most was, so let me take a step back. Nothing was a surprise to me, right? But the thing that was interesting was from the women that took the survey, a large amount of them were college educated or had advanced degrees. But the jobs that they had didn't pay them enough to pay back the debt that they owed for getting those degrees, or
Mhm.
that you would think would be what someone should earn based on the education that they have. And so, like that was pretty shocking, right? So if you have a master's degree, you've gone to school, you took out school loans, but you don't have a job that actually pays you enough. So that really stuck out to us. And so it had a different lens or a different way of talking about gender equity, and pay equity, right? Because it allows us to talk about what's the difference between Black women and white women or other women of color in terms of pay. But then there's the level of, we actually should be paid even more, right? Because of the degrees we have, the experience we have, and because of race.
Yeah. So, when we talk about politicians and elected officials, obviously they are at the forefront of change too, because they're the drivers of policy and they're the ones that can really make something happen. So, from your perspective, give me a little drill down as to what possibly administration can be doing in this time to really address some of these issues that are very, that aren't so hard to really be able to be achieved.
Right. Well, that's a good one. So, one thing that's starting to happen now, you definitely hear more about Black maternal health, and like the horror stories that you hear, but there are ways that they actually could be prevented. And so, like this survey allowed us to lift that up even more. And so, just really gauging one thing of like, what does that look like at the city level, right? But what can be done at the state level? So, when it comes to like access for healers, when it comes to making sure that there's more opportunities for Black doctors, nurses, doulas, midwives, whatever, to be a part of the process, right? Is a huge thing. So what does that look like when you were thinking about um, debt relief for schools or even pipelines, right? So that has us thinking about what that could be. On the housing front, when we're talking about Black women being like the most vulnerable around evictions, we need stronger eviction protection, right? We need a real conversation about who's impacted and why they're impacted, and having state level laws like good cause eviction passed to make sure that tenants are protected, and then having the resources and the access for people to know what their rights are across the state. We also need to have statewide right to counsel. If I'm going in and I see my landlord there with a lawyer and I don't have legal representation because I can't afford it, at least now there will be lawyers that are there whose job it is to be there and be my counsel to defend, right? So it allows us to have some really clear budget asks, have some stronger, legislative asks at the city and state level. And a lot
Housing.
of that will be determined when we do our second phase, right? Because we just finished our first phase, we're going through our second phase now. That'll be launched the week of September 19th.
Mhm.
And from taking that information from phases 1 and 2, being able to meet with our leadership team to say like, okay, so how do we want to slice this and actually create the agenda from there that we would launch in 2023. So I
Right.
wouldn't be surprised if we see some of this back on there.
So really, you are having a second survey that's coming out, and
Yeah, second phase, yep.
right, and so the second phase of the survey, what will that particularly drill down to?
Yeah, so the second phase is, one, some lessons learned from the first phase in terms of some of the questions, and it actually drills some of the questions down a little bit more. So when we talked about housing, we knew that was an important issue. We asked particular questions around housing. right, for women to rank what was most important to them around housing. So we had a list from eviction protection to home ownership to, gentrification, all of those things. And then whatever are the biggies from that allows us to form our platform, right? The same thing around education, the same thing around wages and healthcare.
Yeah. So as we look now towards, and I want to take a look here at this particular statistic that I was looking at, and when we talk about Black women, a lot of times when we think about Black African American women being engaged in the process, there is an overwhelming number that I'm looking at of people who say that when it comes to the issues that matter the most, sometimes because of life's issues, it's very hard for Black women to be engaged in a lot of these agendas and initiatives simply because of the pressures of life. Agree, disagree?
Yeah, no, we found that in our survey, right? Like those barriers came up to the surface, all the way from the hours when meetings are to having access to childcare, to having transportation to get there and understanding the process. And so, at least on the CVH side, when members are coming to meetings, we provide, Metro cards for folks to get back and forth. We provide childcare, right? Because we know that that's a barrier. We also provide translation, right? Because if you are either Spanish speaking or, Haitian Creole, what have you, you want to be able to practice, have language justice, right? That you're able to communicate with everybody. And the same thing around food, right? Sometimes we have meetings over the dinner hour. So we have some type of food that people can eat while we're doing this important work. And it would be great if other entities took that into consideration and did similar things, right? Providing transportation, providing childcare, providing meals, and translation being critical, right? And also holding things in hours that people can actually participate.
Right. Share with me, Juanita, about this, because we're right on the borderline of the 2022 midterm elections. A lot of people are concerned about where we're going to go here, but there is this push, there's this agenda to really get people out to vote. Give me your perspective on the work that you're doing there, because this election, I know the presidential election was critical, but and almost every election is critical, but we keep saying that, right? But when we look at the things that are at stake right now, particularly the House, the Senate, and a Democratic-led Congress and a Democratic Senate, you got the opportunity to continue that, but those can go out with low voter turnout. So how are you addressing the issue of not just voter registration, but also voter turnout?
Yeah. No, I mean, at CVH and at CVH Power, those are critical for us, right? And that goes back to the information that we found in our survey around Black women being the most registered, but not as engaged. So when we're doing our door knocking, our texting, our phone banking, we are targeting Black women between the ages of 18 to 35 and talking to them, right? Not only just reminding them to go and vote, but also asking what are issues that are important to you during this election, right? And then bringing that back to the campaign work that we're doing at our organizations and saying why it's so critical for people to get out and vote. We just did that with the primaries that we had for New York State, and at the federal level, being able to talk about, inflation is a real thing. When you go to the store and something that might have cost $4 at one point is now costing 10, right? What happens with those policies depends on who's in those seats, right? So that being an important issue. Again, housing is a critical thing. What can be done at the federal level? Again, same thing, being able to connect people's day-to-day issues to what's happening with these elections, right? And then doing that ongoing education around, Schoolhouse Rocks, right? The whole thing about I'm just a bill, understanding what that is, and then how does that apply to what's happening here and making it engaging and acceptable.
Somebody said Schoolhouse Rock. I don't know about that. That means you're too young to know about that. Those of us who know about Schoolhouse Rock know exactly what that means. I am just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill.
The Capitol Hill, exactly.
That's it. Oh, listen, about about your organization. I mean, you're a driver for it, not just finding out information, but also really being a proponent for being an advocate and a voice. So talk to us about how you and your organization continues to put pressure on these organizations and government entities, right, to really right the wrong and really bring some balance here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, CVH Power is, that's what we do and that's what we're known for, right? So we are consistently meeting with elected officials. We are a member-led organization. So the campaign issues that we talk about, who we have to have conversations with are, they come from our membership, right? So we have chapter meetings with members where we go through, like, what do we want? Who needs to give it to us by a certain time? And meeting with them and being able to chart out a path of action, right, to get what we need and what we want. So, you know, we put pressure on them by meeting with them. We hold things called like direct actions, like protests, if they don't do what they need to do. You know, we can go all the way from a full out like call-in campaign to somebody's office to, mass protest at their office or their house. It depends, right? And it just goes back to being able to say, people who are directly impacted by the issues, holding those who are in power responsible for some of the conditions, right? And saying, like, you need to right some of these wrongs, like you said. And so that comes from meeting with us, by hearing our stories, by hearing the evidence we have of these things, and really working with us to change it. That's why I'm excited about the work that we do at both organizations, because we can put forth what we want to see happen at CVH Power. But if the elected official isn't doing what we want them to do, or if there's an election coming up, it's our CVH Power, our sister org, that does candidate interviews, right? So we're asking them these questions about what they have or haven't done, or what they really won't do, all of those things. And then it's the members who decide whether or not they get our support. And if you win our support, then we're knocking on doors for you. We're letting people know to vote for you. We're finding out all these different ways to make sure you're in that seat. And then following up on the commitment of co-governance with us, right? Which really means that we are in relationship to building and changing the policy to improve the lives of low-income working class folks of color in this state.
Yeah. So for you, obviously a lot of work that's on the table and a lot of things in front of you, but talk to me about your assessment, because as you're looking at all these things, I'll go a little bit further. We've got a new mayor, and he's in his first year, about almost 3/4 of the way through. Are you satisfied with what you're hearing by way of initiatives and dealing with things that are really particularly germane to the African-American Black woman experience?
I definitely think there is more to be done. And there's a relationship that needs to be developed, right? With new mayor, we have some really great relationships with members of the city council. And so, being able to move that now into building a relationship with the mayor to really push further on the housing plan that he put out, that, it was definitely something that got our attention. Like, okay, this is interesting things here, but now how do we actually put some meat to this, right? Like, how do we actually make this a reality? And then the same thing around economic justice, right? When we're talking about wages and jobs and education. So there's definitely so much more work to be done, and looking forward to engaging in deeper conversation relationship with Mayor Adams to make that a reality.
Yeah. I want to thank you for joining us. Great conversation. Let us know as you get into survey number 2. Got to have you back, and we'll discuss this even further and chop it up.
Will do. Thank you so much.
All righty. Juanita O Davis, our guest here. We want to thank you so much for being with us.